Well, welcome everyone. My name is Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder and curator of Roaring Artist Gallery. We are a fully virtual art gallery that supports and exhibits exclusively the work of women identifying and non-binary artists. And we are here for number 4 of our 4-part series for our Awakening in Fear exhibition Artist Talks. And I'm so excited for this artist talk. It's going to be wonderful. We have Sanaz Feizi, Anna Mathei, and Liz Darrell here. Sanaz, you're up first. I'm going to read your bio, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. And before we get started, Sanaz's work was actually one of her pieces was actually Best in Show, which I got to pick for this particular exhibition. So I am so excited to hear more from you, Sanaz. But let me go ahead and read your bio, and I'll hand it your way. All right. Sanaz Feizi is an interdisciplinary artist with a focus on design who earned her MA and BA in visual communication in Tehran, Iran. She also holds her AA in visual arts. Currently, she is an MFA student in design at Rutgers University, Mason Gross School of the Arts. She has been working as an art teacher for years, and she also has experience in the varied areas of art and design. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. She's currently a part-time lecturer at Mason Gross School of the Arts. All right, Sanaz, I'm going to hand it your way.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me for this artist talk and also for having me today. I'm going to share my screen first. And yeah, my name is Sanaz Feizi, and I was born and raised in Iran. And I'm from Ardabil, a mountain city in northwest of Iran. I would say that my mother has a crucial role in my life and also my interest in art. She used to do really colorful and full of texture handicrafts and also dolls that I can show you here, one of the dolls that my mother made. And, you know, also these dolls are symbol of my hometown because my mother was influenced by the traditional and local dress of my hometown. I would say that anybody in my family is interested in art, and so growing up in this atmosphere, I was interested in art as my main path in order to continue my education and also my professional career. After graduation from high school, I participated in, let's say, the entrance exam for art universities, and I was able to get admission to one of the art universities in Tehran, Iran. I studied visual art at that college, and since it was a teacher training college, I was able to teach at high school after my graduation. I also had a BA anyway in visual communication, and I can say that my background mostly is in graphic design. However, I have some experience in web design, illustration, and also animation. I have worked on different topics. However, I can say that the social equality is one of the important topics that I would like to explore. And I work with different media. However, typography is the main visual language of my work, but I cannot deny the role of illustration in my artwork or design work. So you are seeing some series of posters that I work for the sociocultural subject. And in this work, I use typography and also a combination of illustration. And also for my logotype, which is in Persian, I was influenced by Iranian calligraphy, and I use them in order to make these logotypes. And for designing my logo, I was inspired by Iranian motifs. I would say that I really like to incorporate Iranian identity in my artwork when it is possible. In my artistic trajectory, among all social issues, I would say that women's issues are an umbrella for my work. So, as you know, I was raised in a country where women are less valuable compared to the men, and their rights are not recognized by society and, more importantly, by government. So during my life, I came across a wide spectrum of limitation and problem. So that is why I was interested in working on women's issues. As you may know, right now, I can say that a revolution is happening in Iran, and women, along with other people, are fighting for their rights. They are redefining and reclaiming their rights, and women are the important figures in this, let's say, revolution. And all people are chanting women life freedom. So I would say that this society is an inspiration for myself. When it comes to women's issues, I developed an animation which is about the freedom that women, has less. They don't have, I can say that they don't have any freedom in my country. So that is why I made this animation. If possible, let's take a look at it, and then it has audio. Can you hear it?
We can't hear it. We can see it though.
Oh, okay. Should I stop and share again? I think at this point I can share the sound as well. So this animation is called the Curator. And this is derived from my personal experiences, disparities, and limitation that I came across during my life. I choose cycling because I think it's a symbol of freedom and also happiness. Actually, this animation is a reminder of women who buried their dream of, achieving freedom with themselves. I also made some, illustration, which is related to child marriage. This illustration is based on my mother's life. She had to marry at a really early age. And my mother found the hope when she was expecting her first baby, because having a baby was an inspiration in order to be strong and make a let's say, better life. And I followed this path and came to USA in order to continue my education. And as you right now I'm an MFA student at Rutgers University, Mason Gross School of the Art, and also I teach design there. At the very beginning of this way, I developed an index in order to introduce Furor, an Iranian poet, as a representative of successful women who strive to lead a successful life according to their goal, despite all the difficulties that she had during her life. Her poems was censored by Iranian government. However, she never censored herself. Another design that I developed during my education is a publication. This is about the female genital mutilation, FGM. And the purpose of this project was not only to introduce this act of violence, but also to introduce associations, institutions, and individuals who strive to end this act of violence. Actually, women's awareness was really important during doing this project, because during my research, I found that in different parts of the global, women themselves are supporting this act of violence. So I think it is crucial that women themselves try to stand up against violence and try to end this kind of acts, which I think are really terrible. Yes, and I also developed some installation for this project, and you can see some photos of that installation. And next, I want to talk about the posters, the series of posters that I developed in order to invite women to talk about, to, let's say, break their silence and talk about their problems. And I have a quote from Audre Lorde that she says, liberation comes from being aware of our rights and suppression our inner oppression. So the women must unite despite all the differences that we have. And we should try to make a community, to make a society which the word oppression is not equated to women. We know that all around the world, women are dealing with different psychological and physical abuse, and they are suffering from, let's say, different violences. And so we need to try to get rid of these anti-feminist beliefs from the individual minds. And I think the important thing here is that women themselves should unite in order to make a community, in order to make a society that they can live there freely. So I designed this poster in the hope of being the voice of women who trapped in the darkness of the violence and discrimination, and also invite them to unite and talk about their problems and step forward in order to get rid of their problems. And currently I'm working about female body and its relation to society and also biopolitics. And there is different problems related to female body, and the very same problems are amplifying violence and discrimination against them. And so, for example, as I said before, right now, Iranian women are killed or arrested because they are not covering their body as it is expected by the government. So I am interested in this project because female body has always been questioned. And in different parts of the world, something is trying to take over females' autonomy over their body. It can be religion, it can be tradition, rules, politics, medicalization, or moralizing the very natural issues. And currently, I'm working on, sorry, can you see the project? Currently, I'm working on, my work focuses on uncovering the influence of socio-political and socio-political norms and medical intervention on menstruation and breastfeeding. And the project that you are seeing is an ongoing project that I am currently working on it, and it is about breastfeeding and its relation to moralizing the issue and biopolitics, and also feminist view on the breastfeeding. Yeah, and I really appreciate your time. And since you, let's say, listen to me and look at my work, so thank you so much for being here and listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing to see. You have such an interesting perspective, but you're taking what you have been through, you're taking your culture, you're taking these things and helping us understand and also see where change needs to be made. And it's amazing what you're doing. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Sanaz?
I have a question. I was just, I want to say I thought the animation was beautiful. That was just fantastic. I mean, all of it was, but that I feel like I'm going to carry that around with me for a while. I was just wondering how you choose your medium. It feels like you do animation, you incorporate text sometimes, you use textiles and stuff. I was just wondering, like, is it coming from like a place of like you see an item or an action, and you're like, I want to capture that, or like just where that comes from?
Sorry, your question is about the media that I choose when I want to work on the project?
Yeah, like what says go with a painting or a sculptural thing versus an animation?
I think I don't have any clear answer for this question, but when I want to start a project, I usually have different ideas, and I try to go with the idea that I think can help me to convey the meaning in a way that I want. So sometimes it can be illustration, and the kind of frame of the illustration is very in line with the subject that I want to go. And sometimes I think this project needs to have, let's say, audio. This project needs to be not to be still. It needs to be something kind of animation. So I think it's related to the project actually, and how I want to convey the meaning to the audience.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, I have one for you, Sanaz. I noticed one thing that sort of ran throughout your presentation was red thread. I would love to hear more about your use of the red thread.
Yeah, actually the red thread comes from my project FGM, and I chose that because I didn't like to, let's say, to approach the issue from very directly. So I was thinking that this red thread can be a symbol of, let's say, violence, and also the pressure that women have to deal with during their life. And I was thinking that if I pronounce it correctly, that's sewing something, and using the needle can imitate let's say, can be a symbol of the pressure and the violences that women should undergo during their life. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
It did, and it was a thank you very much. It also struck me, I have a graphic design background as well, and every single time the red thread was in something, it sort of popped out, even against the red lips in some ways. And that was very interesting to me. I really enjoyed your presentation a lot. Do we have any other questions or comments? All right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, we will go ahead and move forward. But Sanaz, thank you so much for sharing. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next up, we have Anna Mathei. Just a moment. Let me pull up here. Okay. Anna Mathei is a mixed media artist based in San Francisco who creates dynamic sculptural paintings that use light, texture, and shadow to tell her stories through the physical. Her art reflects on boundaries, both real and imagined, and blurs them. It invites a viewer to imagine the haptic translation of feeling and contains symbolic references to her life, private and public, as well as feelings on the human experience and social order. Her work is heavily influenced by her Indian immigrant upbringing in the rural Deep South and her experiences in male-dominated pockets of corporate America. All right, Anna, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for the intro. I'm on the browser of Zoom, so I think I'm having a little trouble sharing my PowerPoint, but I will just dive in and maybe try and click around while I'm doing that. I wanted to just, give a little bit of background on myself. I grew up, I'm an Indian immigrant. I moved to the US when I was a toddler. I moved around quite a bit when I was younger and eventually mostly grew up in the rural Deep South. Which was a very different and weird experience. Since then, I, went to college for English, spent 3 years in medical school, and then to law school before kind of realizing that I needed to have more time to create. I still work as an entertainment lawyer. I'm based in San Francisco, but I working for a studio in LA that gives me some time to work on my art as much as possible and try and grow that aspect of my career. The piece today that I wanted to talk about is what was in the exhibition is a part of my Wild Woman series. And that Wild Woman series is, sorry, do you mind if you just get 1 second to see if I can try and find how to get this up here?
Sure.
I don't think that's gonna work. Okay. So it was a Wild Woman series of paintings, which originally started kind of on an impulse. I had been working mostly in a lot of figuratives. I had recently discovered plaster, Venetian plaster. I had been redoing my house here, and I always like to work in 3D as a mixed media artist and adding texture. And I always kind of struggled with a lot of paints kind of building up to the kind of elevation that I wanted. And when I started using the plaster, I realized that was such a great material to do that with. And I started really diving into these figuratives that incorporated a lot of found materials, found paper, textiles, and a thermostat even. And I take inspiration from anywhere around me, but because of, my life and my experiences, a lot of my art is really, oh, thank you, it stems from my experience as a woman and also very specifically a brown woman. Where I grew up in rural Louisiana, I was pretty much the only Indian other than my sisters. And sometimes you're privy to really backwards thinking on, race, but also gender. And, coming from India, when we think about feminism, I think that for where they were in time, I think that my mom was quite progressive. They got married later. She got her degree. But ultimately, there always was like this focus on being a very well-behaved woman in a certain way. And you had these expectations about family and childbirth and all of this stuff. And in the same way in Indian culture, there is this sort of preference for males. So there's, you kind of hear it from your family elsewhere, even if it's not coming from your own immediate family. So I all of these things kind of baked into my background, and it took me a while, I think, growing up in that environment and the South, and with an immigrant background, to really kind of have that moment of like, hey, I just don't agree with this at all. Which sometimes I look back and think like, it's interesting how much you were annoyed by and then silently accepted. But there came a time in my life that I realized like, okay, this is not okay. And I really equated that to the idea of being wild, because so much of what I had thought was pressed upon me about what it means to be a woman was a lot about being very, well behaved, and fitting into someone else's expectations of you rather than your own. And I think that feminism grew in me whenever I started working, and especially also when I left for professional school. I attended medical school in Louisiana itself, and I can still remember whenever I was in surgeries, scrubbed in. It was just while I was still in school, and the head of the department came in and for 2 minutes and met me and looked and said, "Okay, pretty girls can't do surgery," and then just walked out and gave me a bad grade. And at that time in Louisiana, I protested this, but it was kind of viewed by the administration that I was the one who was making trouble. And that kind of got my wheels turning in this way of, how do you change, or how do you kind of get that anger out? And I think that it ended up being through art. While I was in, New Orleans, I was also sexually assaulted at one point and went to a counseling service through my school. And that was the first really, really big splash of ice, because that's when it actually heard all of this victim blaming sentiments, questions about where you are, what you were wearing, there was a lot of blame, I think, put on me, even by the people that were meant to kind of help me through that experience. And I started to see, like, with very wide eyes, that I was living in a culture that, even in the West, is not always fair to women at all. I mean, we're kind of made to be responsible for things that are outside of our own selves, and yet the responsibility for our own bodies is often taken away from us. So thinking about my background in Louisiana, and also, going through these professional schools and then eventually into corporate America, a lot of my pieces really reflect on that experience of being the other and what it means to navigate that territory, and looking at the tension between your needs to be an individual and society's desires or expectations of you and your behavior and their analysis of it. And I think, a lot of times women, we get put on this brutal double-edged sword where you really can't win. So it's just interesting to me to think about that balance in my work and how I can express my, sarcasm even about how people feel. One of my pieces, for example, was called Hot and Cold, because I also hear a lot about women, and when you think about women's sexuality, about a woman being hot and cold. And that was actually the piece that I used this little thermostat on. And it was a mixed media piece, and you could turn the thermostat dial and you could see, her open, basically. And it was kind of this comment on the external expectation also being folding in while the woman is at blame. So when I started the Wild Woman series, I was working more in those kind of figurative works, and I decided, I just had a moment. Sometimes you have a moment where you want to try something different, or you need to get something out, and I started working on this abstract piece. And I was thinking about a friend that had called me, and she was in Bali, and the person she had was dating and was traveling with ditched her there. And so she was supposed to be traveling for months, and she had to make a decision. Was she going to come back and, basically hide away, or was she going to stay there? And, we talked about it at length, and eventually she ended up staying in Southeast Asia for a few months, learned how to surf like a badass, and, really had a great period of transformative growth. And so when I was building that first Wild Woman piece, I was thinking about that idea of being wild and free and really brave about championing yourself, even when you kind of are left out by other people or not. And it just got me thinking about that there's so many experiences as women where you really do have to be brave just in our regular existence. And sometimes that bravery is just in standing up for yourself, and or standing up for others. That are being disparaged or treated unfairly, and it can be very hard. A lot of the time, you might be the only woman in the room. That's happened to me quite a lot in my career. So Jenny's surf abstract, it was a piece inspired by the ocean, and I started to think of the ocean as this great analogy about like an untamed beauty, something that is vital to our existence, something that is still dynamic, but that can't really be controlled and has its own life, and the beauty in that. And I equated it with the concept of what I called the Wild Woman. And so Jenny was actually the first Wild Woman painting. And I started to put together more ocean abstracts as I moved through the series, eventually coming to this one front and center in the screen, Swishbone, which is the one that is in the exhibition today. And Swishbone was a special piece because it actually, when I first did it, it was a redo of an older piece, and I was looking at it and I was thinking, what is more in theme with this idea of a transformative, like self-reliance, self-expression, bravery, than, kind of moving this piece into something else that isn't in almost like a very impulsive way. So I experimented with a lot of different marks in this series. Some of them would be very like bold splashes, or rogue marks, and that a lot of that came into Swishbone in the center of the piece, and also kind of bringing in some more figurative elements. Unfortunately, I don't have the Zoom view up, but if you look to the right of the, I guess if you call that a peace sign, in the bottom lower right, you can see kind of a vague outline of a woman stretching upwards. And then in the bottom triangle there, if you zoom in, there's these figures of women in cages and a lone UFO at the top. And it's just kind of thinking about this idea of alienation and control, and also some kind of escapism there. And a lot of that piece was done through really emotive, like energetic marking, I guess. I mean, I think part of the time I was dancing, part of the time you're just thinking about experiences you've had and really kind of getting in there and making, history on the canvas. So I kept going with the series. Actually, Wild Woman was number 13. So I kind of feel that's one of my numbers. I was born on the 13th, and I wanted it to kind of feel very much like it said something about my experience, like that it gave you, when you stood in front of it, which it actually projects out about 7 feet, so it's really coming at you, that you had a sort of visceral experience that maybe it's exciting, maybe it's you're feeling like this anger or frustration, or maybe it's just wild and happy. I think there are parts of the piece that are all like that. And then, I kept moving with the series, and if you look left of Swishbone there in the middle, it's Passion Flower, and that's actually the last Wild Woman I did. It's number 15 in the series. And so this, again, it's more of a joyous celebration of woman, and it has these kind of watery elements to it, but it definitely moves away from the more constrained ocean kind of feel of some of the other works, which was interesting as a process to me. I feel like this series I learned a lot from, because I was experimenting a lot with like how to make different marks on the canvas. I was working with relatively new material in the plaster, limestone plaster. And so I noticed that once I decided this is kind of an ocean abstract or a surf abstract series, I actually controlled myself. And I thought that that was funny when I realized that I was constraining myself. And so the first half of the Wild Woman series actually are much more apparently inspired by the ocean, like if you see in the top right. Whereas the latter, there's elements of it, but it's not as controlled. And I think of this series, it's a balance of chaos and control. Basically, I wanted to be able to say, like, I'm proud, or, you know, we should be proud of who we are. Like, there's no need to behave in a certain way just for the sake of others. I mean, you know, granting not injuring other people and all of that, but you have the ability to be your own woman, and that shouldn't be disparaged. And the idea of being wild and free, which has been used negatively, and especially when you think about like life in corporate America, you're expected to have a certain demeanor. You're expected to be very constrained, and it causes this disjuncture between who you are in your public and your private life. Which is unfortunate. And I think this series for me was really kind of a reclaiming the idea of a wild woman as something that's great and something that's necessary, and to just get by, and that we should all kind of champion as, you know, find the wildness beneath yourself to kind of fight through you know, these gender inequalities, to stand up for yourself, and just to kind of make it through life's own hurdles as a woman. So this series meant a lot to me. After this, I kind of started working on some other reductive expression, metallics, thinking about the Ukrainian war, and the velocity of love and loss. These were all more minimal as far as the composition. They were highly texture focused. I called it the Guns and Gold series. And so the whole series is gold with a gun colored patina. And just that title kind of came from its origins, and thinking about how war comes from greed and corruption from guns and gold. You know, since then, I've been working on some new pieces that incorporate some figuratives and some abstracts, sculptural abstracts, that actually use textiles, sari textiles, so vintage sari textiles. So that's looking kind of more at my relationship to my cultural heritage as growing up in the U.S. Without too much Indian family nearby, and just, you know, also thinking about how talk about race in the rural deep South affects or affected my own perception of my culture and my acceptance of it, my celebration of it. And so that's kind of what's to come now for me. Thank you. Did anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really cool. Did you grow up in Louisiana?
I did, yeah.
I grew up in the deep South. I grew up in the Florida Panhandle, and it's always fascinating to me how artists take that experience when they grew up in the deep South and use that in their work. It's something I've done a lot in my own work, and it's really interesting to see. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
I had a question again. I was just wondering about the like figures that you said you incorporated into stuff like the UFO and like the caged women and all of that. I'd love to hear like more about that and why you chose that, or like how you incorporate it and everything.
Sure. Part of my feelings or thoughts when I was working through Wishbone was thinking about how, like, the external judgment of women, it's like very constraining a lot of the time, and I felt at times very caged by it. And so it was like there's a nude women figure, so it's kind of like this wild lady that's been caged in there. And so that was my thought process behind that. And, you know, also thinking about the UFO, it was really it's sort of like a beam me up, Scotty moment, like get me out of this place, but also just symbolizing like, hey, like this is alienating, like this feeling of being judged or being seen in society ultimately as a second class. Maybe it doesn't come out all the way in our country as it does other places, but it still is definitely there, the level of bias. And so that was really where that was coming from.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Doris had a comment in the chat. She said, noticing such profound differences in the cultural backgrounds of our two speakers, still oppression is the common thread. I think that was a very, yes, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Let me see. Any other things in the chat? One thing I would love to know, so I know the blue is sort of an interpretation of the ocean. Does it have any other meaning for you in that Wild Woman series? Because I noticed there is a lot of blue.
Yeah, well, it started mostly from the ocean, but it's also kind of this color of peace. So, like for me, this series is an expression of feelings that I've had to work through myself and then come to peace with. And so, a lot of the blue to me is also kind of reflecting on, kind of coming to terms with what is reality and then trying to work and be brave to correct it. And so that is kind of where that color comes from, in addition to the ocean background.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Anna. It was really wonderful hearing your backstory and then seeing your work and reflecting in that. And that's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Last up, we have Liz Darrell. I'm going to read your bio and then I'll hand it your way. All right. Liz Darrell is a multidisciplinary artist born and based in New York City who aims to investigate the worlds within and around herself through camp, sarcasm, and humor. Her work revolves around subjects such as mental health, femininity, queerness, and privilege, and through it, she hopes to shine a light on the unremarkable in a remarkable way. Her work has been included in Redwood Art Group's Art Expo New York, Brouhaha's Women Only exhibition, Pile Press Summer 2022 issue, the Holy Art Gallery's art-based exhibition, and Las Linneas. Am I saying that correctly?
I have no, I don't know.
Okay. Art Gallery's Women in Art exhibition. All right, Liz, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna talk a little bit and then pull up the slideshow, which is gonna be also exciting. So I'm sorry if you guys get a little scary peek of my desktop. But a bit about me. I'm like born, based, and bred in New York City. My background, like my family background and everything, was in theater. My parents are like Broadway people, so live performance has always been a really big part of my life. I never really took an interest in visual art when I was younger because I just didn't feel like I was very good at it, and it always felt really inaccessible and very precious. And so when I went to school for drama, and then like a year or so before I was graduating, everything was getting really, really stressful. I was feeling really isolated. I was struggling mentally, emotionally with my family and my partner's family at the time. And I just felt like was becoming like emotionally constipated and didn't really have an outlet to kind of vomit it all out onto. And so I started creating pieces and just like hot gluing stuff together, and found like a lot of catharsis in that act. And so about a year ago is when I was like, you know what, I'll try doing this professionally. And one of the things and going into that, especially like being of and in the time of like social media and Instagram, which is so visual, which is great, but like terrifying, and advertisements and amount of television and like videos that we have access to is insane and wonderful, but intimidating. I was really struggling with like creating things for myself, but also things that people could connect to or be comforted by or like enraged by or disgusted by, because there's this whole audience that we have access to because of the internet and because of all the applications and platforms. So going into my professional journey, creating things that were really accessible to anyone, whether you were an art connoisseur or like anything, whether you go to the museum every time you visit a place or you skip it purposely every time you visit a place. I wanted to make stuff that is interesting and appealing or disgusting, in a way that engages with the viewer, even if the viewer doesn't necessarily want to engage with it. So that kind of brings me to the stuff I'm going to be sharing today. The piece that is included in the exhibition. I'm going to try to share my screen. Here we go. No, it's not sharing. Here we go. Fantastic. Is it happening? Can you guys see everything?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so getting into it. The piece that is included in the exhibition is my piece, The O'Keeffe Spread. This is part of my series Ladylike, which is about exploring feminine forms and figures in formal settings, doing actions that aren't particularly ladylike. So the idea for it all came about when I went with my partner and her family. They took a family trip to Dubai and brought me, which was lovely. But it was a little bit it's a decadent place. It's gorgeous for the most part. The labor laws are a little bit like, meh, but it's a beautiful place to be. And everywhere that we went, there was like these gorgeous seating arrangements everywhere. And I was like, I want to take a picture of all of these chairs. And so I started taking pictures of all of these seating arrangements. But then, and here are two more in the series, when we were in those spaces, I realized that I was feeling really, really constricted. Mostly because these were usually it was a hotel lobby, or it was like a restaurant area, or anywhere that you're supposed to be behaving yourself. And especially as a queer woman who was there with my queer partner in the UAE, where it's illegal, there was this aspect of danger to it. Like if I did mess up and accidentally kissed her, which would be normal, like that actually presents a real danger. And so I wanted to illustrate that feeling and that kind of urge to defy the expectations that are put on the feminine form, right? Like regardless of gender identity, like regardless of race, if you're shaped a certain way, right? Especially as like a big boobied lady myself, like if you're shaped a certain way, you find yourself imposed like with these expectations that you have to abide by. So the series grew from like a bit more excessive, where it's tweezing and shaving, smoking. Excess is definitely something that I wanted present in the series. These were the rest of them. The process of creating them was me playing around with Photoshop, honestly. It's something that I took like one class on when I was like 14 or 15. But then when I got these images and I wanted to start creating something, I really wanted to mess with the idea of like what we perceive to be reality. So the objects that the women are holding, or like the smoke coming off of the cigarettes and the fart and everything, are actually images that I photoshopped in to the painting before actually putting the paint on, which is something that I have continued to do for a couple series that I'm going to move on to. This one, these are two images from another series I've been working on called Damsels and Distress. This one plays with a lot with, they're not my original images, obviously, but I took the original 1950s movie poster and flipped the role of the white woman who's being like abducted by a monster and the monster. I mean, when you're like living in America, there are very few of us who are not like actively under attack, right, at any given time. But I think especially when something like the overturn of like Roe v. Wade happens, we get this thing where we're like, oh my gosh, we are women, and like this is us, and we are all one, and all this really good like community feeling. But within that, we often end up painting like a lot of people with like really broad strokes, and we lose a lot of like our individual issues and the things that we really need to be supporting each other on. And so this series is meant to be both empowering because it is taking, as someone who is a cis white woman, it's taking like us out of the role of being the victim and being victimized, but also putting us in this position of being the monsters. Because I think, again, especially when we're under attack, it's really easy to look at ourselves and our current circumstances and not take accountability for all the violence and the hate and the oppression that we have facilitated, either actively, by all the like horrendous things that white women have done even now, but also passively as being a tool for fear mongering. When I was originally coming up with the idea, I was playing around with the King Kong imagery, but then when I was on my deep Google dive, I found so many posters from the 50s, 60s, where it's this like white lady being abducted. And I was like, that can't be every movie. And so I did what any like spark noter would do, and I Wikipedia'd like all these different movies, and I realized that in half of them, the woman wasn't even being abducted, right? It was just this image on the poster was being used to make people afraid and want to go watch this movie. One specifically, like Forbidden Planet, excuse me. The poster for that was Robbie the robot, who is historically one of the most friendly robots, carrying off a white woman. And he is not evil in the film. That never happens. But because that image is so ferocious to us and so terrifying, that is like what they chose to use. And these are two more in the series. I think that it's really relevant also to bring things from our history into like our conversations about art and media today, because even though these are from the 50s and 60s, it's obviously not that far of a leap, because even in like 2016 or whatever, when Trump was talking about like all these Mexicans are going to come into the country and they're rapists and they're all these things, it's like he wasn't implying that they're going to go rape like Black and brown women. He's implying that they're going to come rape like your wife and child as like a white person. That's his audience. So it was important to me to bring that up and back through. The next series I was working on with Photoshop was this series, which is the Recorded Herstory series, which was kind of my, I was getting really frustrated with, I mean, just being queer and everything in general. It's really difficult to look at like the gay community, which is still being oppressed globally, but like even in the US, like even in New York City, where it's supposed to be like like the gays have our time. I mean, there's still homophobia, like when I walk down the street and stuff. And we had so much of our own like history and people literally wiped out by the AIDS crisis that like when you see an older person who is gay, it's like someone like protect this gem because there aren't that many of us that like were able to live through that time. So I wanted to take iconic paintings and like really masterful masterpieces, excuse the redundancy, and replace the figure in it with an LGBTQ alphabet mafia icon. This is the first one I made in the series called Pay It No Mind. So it takes Washington crossing the Delaware, and I've replaced Washington with Marsha P. Johnson, and the American flag with the, I want to say Philadelphia version of the pride flag, but it's the like trans POC inclusive one. And Marsha P. Johnson was a like in the fable of like what may or may not have happened exactly on the night of the Stonewall riots in 1969. Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson is often attributed with throwing the first brick and like casting that stone that started all the riots. And I think, and people, it's really important, especially as like a trans woman of color, that like we recognize her and that she gets a chance to have like an epic portrait like those of yore, you know. This next one is The Birth of Venus, but my version is Venus Divine, where I put the performer Divine as Venus. I'm a big fan of Divine. He was in a lot of John Waters films, and he's most well known for being in his film Pink Flamingos, where he actually eats dog poop. He actually eats it like on screen. It comes out of the dog's butt and then he eats it. And it was all like the shock and disgust of the time. And their goal was to really shock people, and they succeeded, because I mean, that's disgusting. But like in all of their things, he was this like, he described himself as like this huge like behemoth of like a creature, because he wasn't trans or even considered himself a drag queen, but like he did play this like womanly character in his films, and so it's important to me to replace Venus, who is kind of that epitome of like femininity and grace and love, with this icon of like kind of shock and like disgust. That was really important to me. This one is Our Leaders and Allies. It's this is the only one in the series that actually includes a straight person in it. It's Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart in the place of Liberty, and one of her companions in Liberty leading the people. Ian McKellen was always like a quiet trailblazer, and especially when gay rights stuff in the UK was going on, he became particularly vocal. And I think that there's a lot of significance as well in his friendship with Patrick Stewart, and that Patrick Stewart has always been really supportive of his friend, not only as a friend but as a gay man. And I know that I've always been really supported by the like straight people in my life who are still there and like continue to show up. So that's what that piece was. And then the last piece in the series is Long Live the Queens, which is originally this portrait of Napoleon. The other fun thing about this piece and like the Photoshop of it all is that they aren't, this one, Liberty leading, none of them are historically accurate, even the ones that are supposed to be portraying a moment in history, right? Washington crossing the Delaware, it was a much different boat. He was not standing, like the ice did not look like that. There are all sorts of like messed up historical things when you look at it. And this one as well, like Napoleon was, there's a more accurate actually painting of this moment where he's like on a donkey and in like a coat, like a nice warm coat, because it was like freezing and rocky, and this wouldn't have never been possible. So being able to turn Napoleon into RuPaul, who is, I think, kind of known as a trailblazer for drag, and everything, all the wonderful goodies that drag has brought with us. It was important to me to show him as the leader that I think he really is, that we don't really give him a lot of credit for. But yeah, so these are my things in case you want to find me, and that's it for me. Yeah. How do I stop sharing? Fantastic.
There you go. Great. Thank you so much, Liz. That was really cool. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I was wondering if your trip to UAE was sort of the start of like your creation and this kind of like feminist and also transactional art, or if that was something that you had already been working on before.
Thank you for asking. Most of my works in the beginning were focused on like mental health, and it was more of like what was going on in my head at the time. And I think that it wasn't actually until like after we came back from the trip that I was like, what was this like feeling, and what was this stuff that was going on, that I decided to like create from that. Of course, I think that it's things that like are always going on in our head, right? Like anytime you live on an intersection, you're like thinking about all of it all the time. But I think that, so I guess no, but also yes, because I wasn't creating anything before that involving like femininity in that way. So yeah, thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Liz, I noticed that in the first series that you showed us, the heads are unfinished and you didn't put any color in the shoes. And I was wondering about this issue. Can you explain a bit?
Well, thank you for noticing. Yeah, I really wanted to make sure that like you knew that they weren't actually there, right? It was important to me that it wasn't like I'm drawing a figure like into this space, but more of like an intruder who's kind of like not there but also present. So the transparency of the shoes was and the kind of like they're not full figures, and the heads and everything was all part of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's really fascinating. Another thing I noticed with those figures, they have extra arms, all of them. I would love to hear more about that too.
The extra arms they're not supposed to be human. You know, they're not supposed to be particularly like physically in the space. As I said, they're not supposed to be ladies. They're not supposed to be human at all. So the multiple arms was just kind of like the excess of it. I think that one of those like behaviors that we're supposed to uphold constantly, but especially in formal settings, is the like making ourselves so much smaller, right? It's like cross your legs, don't put your elbows on the table, like don't gesture, like keep everything down, keep everything petite, everything together. And so the idea of like literally, while maintaining that kind of stereotypical feminine form, to give them as much like bulk and body space and like means to do a bunch of ridiculous things at the same time. Is kind of where that came from.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm sure there's a thing here where I should raise a hand, but anyway.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's, I forget if I said I have a question, because it's not really a question. It's just an observation how, you know, 3 people have spoken and the subject matter is, you know, it's pretty vastly different. And so, and it just in my thinking about how different the backgrounds are, the subject matter of what you're working about. I just feel like, each of us takes the step that we can, we kind of work in response to our lived experience. And by doing that, it's kind of a way to, it's sort of like the butterfly effect, I guess is what I was thinking, is as we take on our own societal expectations or traditions or, challenges, every society that you all grew up in or experienced has allowed for us to, challenge the traditions that really just no longer apply or kept other people comfortable, maybe. And they, by doing, each of us doing our own best, making our own best effort, it just helps someone else to do the same. End of comment. Sorry, you can't see me.
Thank you so much for that, Doris. I was thinking a very similar thing. It's always amazing to me in these artist talks how like I don't ever go in and choose these artists are going to go together in the artist talk, but it always ends up working together in some kind of way that is really enlightening every single time. And yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your worlds and your stories and the way you're responding to them within your art. This has been a absolutely fantastic artist talk. But yeah, Liz, going back to your work, one thing I noticed as well, you can really see the performance aspect in your work. I'm really enjoying that a lot. I enjoy the humor and the sarcasm, and it almost feels like stand-up comedy in some kind of way. Does that make sense?
I'll take it. Thank you.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I I really do. It feels like they all have a punchline in some kind of way. That's maybe more what I'm getting at.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But the thing with comedy is that so much can be said within comedy that can't necessarily be said sitting across the table from somebody at a restaurant. You know what I mean? And I think you're doing that in your work, and it's really interesting to see that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all again so much. All three of you, this has been absolutely amazing. What a wonderful way to end this series of artist talks. So thank you so much. Well, I think that let's see here. Doris said, yes, thank you. I know this is a lot of work. It is for all of you. I know it is a stressful thing doing these artist talks, but it is one of my favorite parts of every time that I get to do these series. And hearing more from the artists, hearing your voices is so important. And I appreciate more than you know that you all come and share with us. But if we have no other questions or comments, we'll go ahead and wrap up for this evening. But thank you again. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, who will be watching this later on YouTube. If you have not yet seen the Awakening in Furor exhibition, it is fantastic, and we have been so proud to have it in our gallery. It will be up through November 13th, which is only one more week from now, even less if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you don't get a chance to see it before it closes, we will have a virtual tour on YouTube coming up very soon after as well. So it'll be there in perpetuity because everything that these artists are saying is so important. And it's one of the wonderful things about the virtual world. All right. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next time. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.